Hey, what do you know about the Byzantine Empire? Well, if you were anything like me, your answer would have been, Byzantine what? I had no idea until I saw this new, wonderful book written by our next guest. It is my pleasure to introduce to you today none other than Vince O'Reilly. Vince, pleasure to have you with us today. You wrote a book on the Byzantine Empire. However, when you look at the cover of the book, it doesn't say Vince O'Reilly. It says Paul Castanelos. You are Paul Castanelos?
I am Paul Castanelos. I'm cheating a little.
Okay.
After all, the center of the book is what is modern-day Greece and Turkey and that part of the world. And my name is Vincent D. Paul O'Reilly, a name that, it doesn't really sound like I know a lot about that. So, but in truth, most people don't, including people from that part of the world. I'm always surprised at how little Greek Americans know of the medieval Greece. They know ancient Greece and modern Greece, but seem to skim over rather quickly that part. And we're talking a 1,100 year empire. It was a successor of the Roman Empire in the east, where the empire did not collapse. And it was the highest civilization this side of China for most of that time. So here we are learning about people in Germany, France, things like this, and totally ignoring the largest civilization in Europe. With this descends from Edward Gibbon, who had a bias against the Byzantines and unfortunately got into our educational system. And
so when did all this begin for you? Was this like a college kid thing, or?
Yeah, actually, yes. I had a professor back in University of North Dakota, by the name of Felix Vonderchek, who was an expert on Middle European history. And again, I'd come out of high school knowing nothing but Frederick Barbarossa and people like that. And he told us about the Byzantines, or if you prefer the Byzantine, some people call it that, Byzantine Empire. And he told me specifically about two characters that have interested me all these years. One is the General Belisarius, Flavius Belisarius, and his wife Antonina. Now, Belisarius was one of the truly great commanders in history. Certainly one of the 10 most famous, some people say one of the 3 greatest. But he's essentially unknown by most Westerners. I think today they may mention him in books, but when I was young, you'd read about the great commanders of history, he wouldn't even be in there.
Wow.
His wife, who had been a prostitute, he married her, accompanied him on his expeditions, or some of his expeditions, when he recovered North Africa and Italy for the Emperor Justinian. Unfortunately, and this reflects in the title of the book, Antonina, she'd been she was the daughter of charioteers, and her mother had put her on the stage, which meant to pimp her, when she was 13 or thereabouts, and she became a prostitute, and then a courtesan, and she had an affair with their godson while on these expeditions. Now, by godson, I don't mean a child. He was baptized. He was probably about 20 years old when he was baptized. And there's been a lot of prejudice, starting with the original biographer of Belisarius, a guy named Procopius of Caesarea, who hated her and slandered her. And it's always seemed to me unfair that people were very happy to condemn this liberated woman, who wouldn't have minded if it was a man for being unfaithful, while totally ignoring all the other commandments that people were breaking right and left and do to this day.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so it's not that she wasn't, her husband was a saint. Belisarius was one of the most noble men who ever commanded armies. She didn't keep her vows, but she was, I think Gibbon expresses it well. I have to look it up here. But he says that she accompanied her husband with a manly affection, and They loved each other very much, and Belisarius risked losing Italy for her, but she had a little place in her heart for this other guy, Theodosius.
Oh, now, another guy, or was she in fact a slut? I mean, your book
she
says
had been a
Byzantine
prostitute.
Slut.
She had been a prostitute. She'd probably been living with a Byzantine official in North Africa, or Syria probably. Before they married, we don't know exactly how they met and married. It depends on which historian you're talking to. Some will say that they were thrown together by the empress because she wanted to use Antonina as her agent to keep an eye on Belisarius, things like that. Others would just say it was a romance. Probably a better author than I, Robert Graves, certainly a better author than I, wrote a book about them called Count Belisarius, and he has them very much. And even if they were thrown together, it's possible, they fell in love. And were in love their whole lives.
But it was a real love.
It was a real love.
Okay.
Now, Procopius does suggest that she had other lovers, but he says things like he's heard this. When he knows something for a fact, he says so. When he's repeating some slander he's heard from somebody else, he never takes credit for it.
Right.
And that's what happens here.
So her reputation is more hearsay than documented?
Well, it's you might say that. Belisarius' private secretary, Procopius, wrote 3 books. One about the wars of Belisarius, another about the building projects of Justinian the emperor, and the third one is a secret history, which wasn't published until a couple hundred years after his death. And in there are all these slanders and things. So he knew what he was talking about. He doesn't out and out lie, but he's careful how he phrases things. You know, there's this. He I think deliberately obscures the timeline. Just Belisarius and Antonina and Theodosius may have had an affair in North Africa. They almost certainly had one 5-7 years later when they were in Constantinople. He just skips over the period in there.
Oh,
like,
wow.
Was there nothing happening? Presumably there was nothing happening, because this guy would have said so if something. Like many ancient, quote, historians, unquote, they're scandalmongers. They love to tell all the dirt. A lot of the things, for example, we used to learn as fact about the Roman emperors has been called into death. You'll read these ancient historians and medievals, and they'll go through a list of these terrible things that the guy did, and at the bottom of the page there'll be something about him raising taxes on the aristocrats. Now we know why he really hated them.
Let's get him, man.
Exactly.
Okay, so, I mean, this all happened a very long time ago, and I know from doing the histories that I've done that it's very hard to get the story straight. Did you find huge contradictions?
Absolutely. I think sometimes how a thing is told by an historian reflects more on him than on what he's talking about. As I said, some of it will paint. Gibbon usually is very hard on people, but he's very kind to Antonina, probably because people had been slamming her and
you know, women have taken a beating in history anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, they have for years. When you think about it, if she was by his side for a lot of this, then she had to go through quite a bit herself. It wasn't an easy life.
She withstood the siege of Rome for a year, and not only were they starving there, but Belisarius finally sent her to what he thought was safety in Naples. She got outside the walls and says, "The heck with this," and goes off and starts raising an army with which she helped relieve the siege of Rome. This was no fading lady. She was a very, very liberated woman, very strong-willed,
and
kind of that woman that not every man can deal with.
I hear you. You know, when I was doing Sybil Ludington, one of the things was, they talked about her one night of heroism, and they failed to cover with accuracy the rest of her life.
Right.
And what we discovered was that she was quite a woman. And I respect what you've done here. What you're trying to do is show us the real woman, the whole woman.
Right.
What in particular would you say if someone said to you, well, what kind of woman really was she? What would you say?
Well, it's a little hard to say because we only know of her through the prejudice reports of Procopius. And with all these people, I guess it's hard to know, unless they're an emperor or somebody like that, to get details of people and the lives of people back in the ancient and the medieval world. We can say she was strong-willed, she was must have been ambitious. Belisarius saw something very deep in her. And
Well, I mean, so what I'm really getting at
she was liberated.
is when you say Antonina, a Byzantine slut, it's sort of tongue-in-cheek?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. That's
Well, I
good.
mean,
That's
she was a slut, but like I say, why emphasize only the seventh commandment and not the
Yeah.
others? All around the people are
there was a whole lot
slander
more
and-
to her than
Sure,
history.
Of course, there has to have been.
Okay.
Just as there was to the characters in my other book, Count No
All right,
Man Happy.
Let's go to that for a second. You've also written another book. It's called Count No Man Happy. Tell us a little bit about that book.
That started out as a bit of fluff.
Okay.
I was in the movie Laura. The detective falls in love with a painting, and the medieval Emperor Constantine VI, when he was a teenager, was betrothed to the daughter of Charlemagne, and he became infatuated with her, although they never met. So this again, I found that Dr. Bondarchuk told us, and I became interested in his life. But it started out as a bit of fluff because back in the 1950s, there was a pinup model by the name of Betty Page. And I decided to write this story, a little short story about Constantine VI meets Betty Page. Well, while I'm writing this, it dawns on me, this is the same person whose mother either blinded him or at least acquiesced in his being blinded. You can't write a bit of fluff about a case like that. Yeah. So this became much more serious, but I could not bear to write out of the book the character of Betty. It's not Betty Page exactly. I mean, she inspired the character, but she's quite a bit different. But she's a bit fetishistic, and he has two marriages. First of all, there's always her popping in and out of his dreams. But he was also put into a marriage by his mother. It was arranged. And that didn't work out very well. So he eventually put her in a convent, which she seemed perfectly happy with. She was that kind of person. And it was the Middle Ages when a lot of people, about half the men in Byzantium in the Middle Ages spent at least part of their life in a monastery. So he did that and married a handmaiden.
Oh.
And that after he was blinded, as Dr. Vondercheck told us, this is probably an expression that would not go over very well today, but Dr. Vesh, she said she followed him around like a puppy dog for the rest of his life. That's not an expression we'd perhaps use today, but she did take care of him. It was a sad, troubled life with he's feuding with his mother, who was a great supporter of the icons. This is the time when they were fighting over whether or not you could have images in churches. And they disputed that. He became something of a military commander. It's relatively successful. And I've forgotten, what actually point I was going to make when I started saying this. but he was eventually blind, lost his throne. Irene reigned alone. And,
so this isn't a nonfiction treatise.
Well, both of these books are fictionalized biography. They are true insofar as we know the facts of their lives.
Okay, so so you kind of filled in the blank.
You have to fill. And in the case of Constantine, there's more to fill in because he lived in the 8th century, and that's the period that's known as the Byzantine Dark Ages. Now, by that we don't mean Dark Ages as in the West. It never got that bad. But it is a time when there isn't a lot of information to work with.
And it wasn't a reflection on what they were doing. It was a reflection on what we don't know about what they were doing.
Right. And as I say, this bothers me with historians. Each one has his own take on things, and they present them not as their own take, but as fact.
Right. Now, these books, I mean, there's a whole lot of information. This is a pretty thick book you have here.
Well, let me show you that in a moment. Just since I assume that nobody knows anything about Byzantium, which is unfortunate, but it comes from time of Edward Gibbon. The last, I think, 90 pages is an afterword explaining the situation, and notes telling you more about these people than you might.
And these notes are nonfiction, factual
this
information.
is all factual information on the back.
Good.
And in the case of that, it runs about 35 pages, and this is about 70. And I have a brief description of the main characters at the beginning, but then you know how it is. You're reading a book and you say, who was that again?
Yeah.
Instead of, well, it is more about him, about the places, about terminology, because there's a lot of this terminology is very alien to us today.
Right. So, take a long time to do the research for this book?
Thank God for Wikipedia. Not that you don't have to be careful with Wikipedia, do, but to have tried to find a lot of this stuff in libraries, a lot of it I wouldn't have found, period. Yeah. Others would take months or years. I've had this book especially in the back of my head since college, but when I went on to writing it and I had to get a lot of detail, it's so good to be able to do that. And who was Bloody John or something, or something like that,
So how long did it take to put all this things together so that it was actually in book form?
I don't really remember.
Months? Weeks?
Yeah,
years?
Well, years. As I say, this has been in my back of my head since college. When I started writing it, I don't know, probably about 10 years ago, but it was not until last year that I got serious about it and put it into
start putting it together.
And,
I know you've shared some of this with our writers group at the Mahopac Library. Have you shared it with others?
Well, I keep trying to.
And people say, Byzantine what?
I have a website, and one of the things on the website is both this and a YouTube narrated version of this, which I don't think the camera can pick it up, but it's a little illustrated introduction to Byzantium, or Byzantium if you prefer, and some excerpts in the books.
Now you have some illustrations that you sectioned out for me here.
Right.
You want to talk about some of these?
Well, yes, these two, that and the one we're standing on, are from Ravenna in Italy, because Belisarius' campaign was in Italy, where he essentially recovered it. His job is finished by somebody else, but he recovered Italy for the Emperor Justinian. And Justinian, if I may, I hope the camera gets this is in the middle, of course.
Maybe we can focus on this a little bit here.
The character, can you get that? The character standing to his right, our left, is Belisarius. His wife Antonina is standing next to the Empress Theodora. And the best mosaics in the world of the Byzantine mosaics are in Ravenna, because that part was never taken by the Turks. So the Turks, being Muslim, of course, don't believe in the showing human representation. Mm-hmm. And they either destroyed or whitewashed most of the stuff in Greece and in Turkey and that part of the world. Whereas Ravenna, they were maintained all these years.
Okay, now you also handed me some photographs here. You want to tell us a little bit more about these photographs?
Yeah, well, let's see if I can remember myself. That's me on the top. That's me.
Oh, there you are.
At the walls of
To prove that you
Constantinople.
were there.
At the walls. Below it is my daughter, another section, and some shepherds at another. By the way, again, if this could be picked up, the walls have in part been restored
There we go.
to how they would have
Try to
looked
do
in the
some
Middle
little-
Ages.
Camera magic here.
Can you
There we
can
go.
you get
Oh, good.
that? It's Istanbul today. It's Constantinople. It's Istanbul. Anyway, it's a wonderful place. It's a magical city. It's one of those places like New York. It's got a skyline that you'll never forget. It's unique.
This is an unfair question. It's like asking a man or woman why they fell in love. But why did you fall in love with the Byzantine Empire? What was there about it? Is there a certain magic that captured
Well,
you?
I tell you, yes. I mean, here I was, maybe 19, 20 years old. I never heard of it. And let me tell you, I studied it for a number of years, but I got busy in life doing things. I was a news librarian. And it fades, whether you want to or not. You pretend you're still as interested as ever, but it fades. Then when my daughter got her first job, she was working with Bill Moyers, and she took her first paycheck and gave my wife and me a trip to Istanbul.
Oh, wow. That's
And the thing is,
great.
the whole thing flowed back as if I had never lost it. I was as interested in it then as I had been,
Wow.
30 years, 40 years before.
So actually seeing it firsthand helped a whole lot.
Oh, tremendously. You walk the land walls of Constantinople and go to places like Hagia Sophia, the great cathedral there. It's a magical place. And if you know your Byzantine history, it's
Right.
very
I think during the social studies classes when they were doing that, I was passing notes to this little blonde that was on my left. No, just kidding. But
I went to a boys' school.
I don't know how much of this is actually taught in the school.
Very little.
Very little. I mean, I know, and I know that's one of your pet peeves.
They're getting better about it.
Yeah.
They do more. But when I was a boy, first of all, even in college, there weren't more than a half dozen books in print on the Byzantines at any one time. And the stock line in high school texts would be the fall of the Roman Empire and for something. It maintained a shadowy existence for another 1,000 years in the East. Shadowy existence. It was the highest civilization, maybe higher than China. Certainly the highest civilization west of China, and a lot of Arab art, architecture especially, is based on the Byzantine. There's right across from Hagia Sophia, the great Byzantine cathedral, which they made it a mosque, so they put up minarets on it. Next to it, across the park, is the Blue Mosque, the great Blue Mosque. And an amateur looking at the two would say, they're twins. They're two beautiful buildings. You look closer at them, of course they're not, but there's such a strong resemblance.
Well, I've said it before and I'm going to say it again. The responsibility of learning history is ours. And we can't blame the schools, we can't blame anybody else but ourselves. We need to read books like this. I think what you did here, Vince, is of major importance. You've captured a time in history that needs to be recognized. You've given us an opportunity to see people in a newer, better, clearer light. It's good work. I encourage you to continue doing that kind of work, and I encourage our listeners to read these books.
Go to the website and you'll get some links and things.
Tell us about the website. What is the website again?
Apuleiusbooks.com, Apuleius, and it has some sections of these. It's also got this as a link to the YouTube. It's got a lot of things that
those photographs we showed today, plus many more,
right.
are on apuleiusbooks.com.
And there's some other things I've written, some short stories, a children's story, and some links.
So you write other things besides this? Your short stories?
Yeah. Well, they're very short stories, very short things, just things that come to me in the middle of the night, tend to be a bit mystical. There's a children's story there that's a bit mystical that a friend of mine, Doug Allen, illustrated, and that's up there. And as I say, there are links to other Byzantine sites, and there's links to a lot of things that have nothing to do with it at all. For example, the green-eyed dragon with the 13 tails.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, I think I saw that one time, but no, just kidding. So, you're a writer. You do a lot of writing. You do some wonderful writing. You have a lot of things to share. Apuleius.com.
Apuleius Books.
Apuleius Books.
One word.
Okay.
If you
is there and available online. We should go to it.
Mm-hmm.
And although you are Vince O'Reilly, Paul Castanello.
Some of it's under Vince O'Reilly, some of my stories. I think my children's story is under that.
So your children's stories are under Vince O'Reilly and not under Paul Castanello.
There's all sorts of stuff. There are essays that I wrote for my grandchildren. I don't suppose we have time to tell you, but there's a 17-page essay that I wrote to my granddaughter on the Nazis when she asked me about who they were. I could tell you a long story about that, but I don't think we have time.
Well, I would love to hear that long story, except we have about 55 seconds left.
All right.
So in that 55 seconds, what I want to tell you is go to the website, read the books, respect and learn about history. Not only American history, although American history is vital and important, there are other places in the world, other people in the world. Can't always trust everything you read. Is she a slut? Maybe yeah, maybe no. But were there more layers to her? Of course there were. Read about those layers. Read about the Byzantine Empire. And whatever you do, stay tuned to this show. Thank you for joining us. It has been our pleasure to be here with you. Vince, a pleasure.